and it straight away to you. An interview with Rabbi ריצ'רד Hertz in Jerusalem in the Hebrew Union College on the 7th of July 1963. Now my first question is a personal association with your personal association with the Reform movement.
My personal association with the Reform movement, my very being here tonight in Jerusalem, here at this Hebrew Union College, established here in Jerusalem, is a testimonial to my involvement in the Reform movement, but even more so, an involvement that dates long before I was born. My family have been in the Reform movement. My children are the fifth generation that were born in the United States. My mother's side of the family came from Austria after the 1848 revolution, shortly thereafter, to Connecticut and New York, and then pushed westward. My mother was born out west in New Mexico, where my grandparents had journeyed after the Civil War on the Santa Fe Trail. So they were very much integrated into the American scene, and for them, Reform Judaism was the only interpretation that made sense in a modern, adaptable, late 19th century Americanism. My father's family came to St. Paul, Minnesota, where my father was born. They had emigrated from East Prussia, somewhere along the Baltic, where the Hertz family had come from, and settled in St. Paul, where my father was born and where I was born. I grew up as a child involved in the Reform movement in St. Paul. I went to the Reformed Jewish Sunday School of the Mount Zion Temple and was thoroughly imbued with the classical Reform point of view. When I was about 13 years old, my family moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where we, of course, immediately affiliated with the Reformed Temple, Temple Emmanuel in Milwaukee, and where my rabbi, we had two rabbis there, Rabbi Samuel Hirschberg and Rabbi Joseph L. Barron. Rabbi Samuel Hirschberg was a classical Reform rabbi of the school of Emil G. Hirsch and David Phillipson, and I grew up in my early teens in that atmosphere. I never heard the word Zionism. I didn't know what it was until I came to the Hebrew Union College. I had already made up my mind to become a rabbi without knowing the meaning of the word Zionism.
Why did you want to be a rabbi?
I was attracted to the rabbinate for several reasons. These were the years of the early 30s, when the Hitler years were already on the scene. I came in 1934 to the Hebrew Union College at 17 years old of age. And I felt that I wanted to become a rabbi because I and my family were deeply moved by what was happening to the Jewish people, not only throughout the world, but in the United States. My vision did not extend much further than the United States. Bear in mind that the Middle West in the 1920s and 30s was deeply isolationist. And my father's political connections with the Republican Party were strongly isolationist, anti-big business, anti-involvement with world affairs. And therefore I saw, as a youngster, very little beyond the American scene. And there, the influence of anti-Semitism, a tremendous rise in the problems of our people, plus the fact that I felt that I could in some small and humble way make a contribution to the serving of Judaism, of Reform Judaism. Rabbi Joseph Barron was my mentor and inspired me to become a rabbi. And although he was not of the same point of view as Rabbi Hirschberg. I again had the classical reform point of view, strongly to the left, that is, in the, I don't mean that in a political sense, but I mean that in a religious and ceremonial and ritualistic sense. So when I came to the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, I found a whole new world, a world that extended far beyond a parochial little temple or a big temple in Milwaukee or in St. Paul. And there I came in contact with students who were deeply imbued with the Zionist movement. I, for the first time, met students who came from an Orthodox Jewish background. I was maybe the only one of two or three in the whole student body who had come from a strictly Reformed Jewish background. Most of the students in my day, especially in those early years, came from yeshivas, they came from Orthodox Jewish backgrounds with far better Jewish background, Hebraically. I didn't know Aleph from Beis. And so this too was something of a shock to me. But so far as the Zionist movement, my eyes were beginning to be opened by students, by reading, by being exposed to a world of Jewish life, and to the tremendous impact of world affairs. I think that I came to a love of Israel and a feeling for the necessity of a Jewish state out of a pragmatic necessity of world affairs. It certainly was not something that was either a philosophy or a mass movement stemming out of emotion. It was something that to me came as a necessity because of what was happening to the Jewish people the world over. And as the years went by and I saw one country after another refusing to lift a finger for the Jews, including our own United States and our own President Roosevelt, and I was a strong New Dealer in those days, a great supporter of Franklin Roosevelt, but on this point too, he did very little. I therefore came to a feeling for a Jewish state in Palestine, out of the necessity of a homeland that would accept and take and find a haven for security and for a decent way of life for the Jewish people in Palestine.
Now, can I ask you?
Yes.
You were studying at the Hebrew Union College, and amongst your teachers were also a few who were really, at least non-Zionist, if not anti-Zionist, like Philipson.
Yeah, Philipson was my teacher.
Yeah, that's why I say. I mentioned his name. Philipson was there.
I never followed Philipson's life.
Why?
Because Philipson represented to me a way of life that was long gone. He was the old guard. I admired him for his historical knowledge, for his intimate and personal association with the early founding fathers of the Reformed Jewish movement. But I could not associate myself with his point of view, with his strong anti-Zionist conviction.
You read his, of course.
Of course.
His great book.
The history of the Reformed Jewish movement.
Not only this, but I mean also his biography, My Life as an American Jew.
I was with him at the time he was writing that and begged him not to include certain, I as a young student, not to include certain things that he told me about. I used to go to visit him. I was very devoted to him personally, even though I couldn't agree with his point of view. And on Saturday afternoons I used to go to visit him at his house. And he would talk to me about the things that he was putting in his book, and I would say to him, but Dr. Philipson, this would not help the Jewish people.
I don't think it did. Did he have any great influence, he or people of his kind, more or less? You know, maybe I think he was the extremist there, but still there were others who were non-Zionist. What influence did they have on the students in your group?
In my generation, Philipson had very little influence.
And let us say other teachers.
Maybe among older men, but in my generation...
And what about Morgenstern?
Morgenstern had a great influence. He had a great influence on me, personally. I learned from him a concept of history, of the philosophy of history, and of the necessity for harmonizing both the universal aspects and the particular aspects, and in building a synthesis of universalism and particularism, which in his later years, Morgenstern came more and more to emphasize rather than in a strong universalism of his earlier years. Yeah. Morgenstern himself changed and developed as a result of world affairs. He was far mellower in his later years when I was a student than I'm told he was in his earlier years when he was strongly anti-Zionist and would do very little. There were other, excuse me, I would say there were other teachers who influenced me strongly at the Hebrew Union College. Jacob Marcus, for example, had a very strong influence in my life. And while I would never say that Jacob Marcus is the strongest Zionist in the world, his deep love for the Jewish people and for the problems and his discernment and perception of what lies behind the historical forces at work in contemporary Jewish life led me also to a keener appreciation, particularly of the Hitlerian period and of the whole rise and destiny of the German people, of the German Jewry under Hitler.
No. I think that this way it covers also maybe the question, can you explain the motivations for the changeover in the attitude of the reform movement to Jewish nationalism? I think that...
I think I've included that because from my point of view, and certainly in my own experience and my own ministry, the necessity for a Jewish Palestine, which later became the State of Israel, had to come, and I was willing to do everything I could, and I did, and I worked very hard in trying to mold a public opinion that would be favorable to the establishment of a Jewish state in this homeland.
Have you taken any active part also in the meetings of the Central Conference, different committee work and so on?
Oh, yeah.
And if you took in this line a part, let us say, in committees that dealt with the problems of world problems, because there are different kinds of committees, you see.
The activities in which I've been engaged in the Central Conference have been either in the field of Jewish education, which was my earliest concern, on which I did my doctoral studies at Northwestern University, or in the field of church and state, and more recently the Committee on Jews in the Soviet Orbit, of which I've served as chairman for the last 2 years for the Central Conference of American Rabbis. There my concerns, which led me to previously to undertake a study mission to the Soviet Union for the White House.
And you were in the...
And I went to the Soviet Union in 1959 and made a survey of the situation of Jews and Judaism behind the Iron Curtain in Czechoslovakia and Poland, and of course in the Soviet Union itself, and then reported to the White House and to the State Department in a report which has since been published. These concerns of mine and activities in the Central Conference have only indirectly dealt with the Zionist movement.
Yeah, that's why I don't...
I mention it only because when I was in the Soviet Union, again and again the question came up with respect to Israel. The Jews in the Soviet Union were tremendously curious, as I found them, about what's going on really in Israel. They would ask, is it true that there is a housing shortage? Is it true that the Jews in Israel have nothing to eat? Is it true that there have no jobs? In other words, the standard propaganda line that had been fed to them by tasks and by the government of the Soviet Union, and they were hungry for some word, some contact with the Jewish people, particularly with their interest in Israel.
Now I come to a question on which I read also in your sermon on Rosh Hashanah, the one that I read today and a few others. That's the question, can we make a distinction between Jewishness and Judaism, as a distinguisher rabbi suggests, and say you, the Israelis, are supreme in Jewishness, and the outer group may have some advantage in Judaism?
You mean the outer group, the diaspora?
The diaspora.
Yeah. Well, I think that there is a very marked distinction between Jewishness and Judaism. Jewishness has to do, of course, with the folkness, with everything concerned with the Jewish people, with their way of life, with their problems and destiny, with their history and their solutions. Judaism has to do with the religious expression, with the spiritual aspirations, with the problems, both philosophic and theological, concerned with religion. And I think that that Judaism and Jewishness are not the same. While they may be two sides of the same coin, every Jew who is strong and as loyal as to the Jewish people is not necessarily a religious Jew. And, per contra, every Jew who may be a very religious and spiritually minded Jew who goes to the synagogue may not be concerned with the problems and identification with the Jewish people and with Jewishness. I find that there's been a great rise in the sense of Jewishness in my generation, in the generation that has been covered by my ministry. I think this is the result of the Hitlerian tragedy. Oh, yeah. I think it's certainly the result of the rise of the State of Israel and all of the forces let loose as a result. The Hebrew language, the cross currents of intellectual ferment which come from Israel to the diaspora and certainly to America. And on the other hand, while there has been a re-emphasis in the Western world on religion, this religious, so-called religious revival that has swept across America, it's the kind of revival which, as one writer has called it, a mile wide and an inch deep. It has not been a profoundly deep it has not been the kind of revival that has deeply touched the lives of people. Oh, true, there are many outer manifestations of this religious revival. Many new buildings, many new synagogues, much larger memberships, bigger budgets, bigger schools, bigger memberships, bigger temples, bigger everything. But as Justice Brandeis once referred to the curse of bigness, bigness does not necessarily mean a depth. Yeah. I think, therefore, that one of the great problems of our time is how to harmonize the great revival of Jewishness with the spiritual aspirations of Judaism, and how to make the spiritual impulse of Judaism touch the Jewishness of people. How, or as Morgenstern, I come back to him because he left a great influence on my thinking, how to harmonize the universalism of Judaism with the particularism of Jewishness that will work for the benefit of both. I think that one without the other is empty and insufficient. While I find much to praise in this remarkable state of Israel, the Jewishness has blossomed into something great and wonderful here. At the same time, I'm not at all sure that there's been as strong an emphasis on the revival of Judaism in the new state of Israel. And similarly, in America, where there has been such a revival of Jewishness on the part of the many sociological factors which have entered into this, and I haven't even gone into that. The fact that now 80% of Jews in America are native-born means that the old world distinctions between Hungarian Jews, Polish Jews, Bohemian Jews, Russian Jews, German Jews have now disappeared and have become virtually meaningless. The great growth in the Reformed Jewish synagogues of America has come about because these Jews have come into Reformed Jewish synagogues not as German Jews or Russian Jews or Polish Jews, but as American Jews, integrated into the American scene. The great contribution which Reformed Judaism has made in making this an American Judaism has strong overtones with respect to Jewishness, and has brought a leveling of the influences of nationalistic and Landsmannschaft kind of Jewishness into an overall feeling of identification with the Jewish people. That, however, has not necessarily meant that it has carried over into the piety, into the religious aspirations, into the intellectual and philosophical points of view. And this is where I feel that Reformed Judaism has much to do in the years ahead. I can't get excited about the existentialist trend among some of the Reformed Jewish leaders, but I do feel that this at least is one approach that is deepening the roots of Judaism. Similarly with the Reconstructionist movement. In my earlier years, I was very much taken with the contribution that Mordecai Kaplan was making through the Reconstructionist movement. I subscribed to the Reconstructionist magazine from the day it was started and still take it. But here again, the humanism and the naturalism of the Reconstructionist movement leave, in my mind, a good deal to be desired. But still, it is a positive and creative force that enriches not only Jewishness, but Judaism itself. And so any intellectual or philosophical thread that will bring color and life to the fabric of Judaism, in my mind, is a positive step forward, a contribution that enriches and deepens this river of Judaism that I spoke about of being too shallow.
And, what do you think about, in connection with this, I think it was Rabbi Berkowitz, time of the First World War still. I think it was he or maybe Kalish, I don't remember exactly who it was, who spoke about something like this, that he prefers Judaism to Jews. And if there'll be a problem like this, whether to stand on the side of Jews or Judaism, he would choose Judaism.
I once heard a similar remark made about Zionism, that he loves Zionism but can't stand Zionists. I think that the remark is more facetious than anything else. I don't see how anybody can love Judaism without also having a deep identification with the Jewish people. Nor, and this is where I come to Israelis, nor can I understand really how one can be in love with the Jewish people without loving the great contribution which the Jewish people have made to the culture of mankind, Judaism.
I think you're absolutely right, but I think we don't still understand Israel. Maybe. I think that most people don't yet know. We didn't find yet the way speaking the same language, you know that, but that's a very complicated.
That's a problem of communication.
Yeah,
not just language. But,
I mean communication. Because we speak the same language maybe now, but we think about different things altogether sometimes. What about, let us go a little bit into the problem of education that you specialized in. First, what is the attitude of the younger generation in your community, in your congregation towards Israel and Zionism today?
I think that the attitude of the young people toward Israel is far more positive than it was when I was a young teenager, and our attitude to the Jewish people or to Palestine or to the, much less to the Zionist movement. There's been, the young people are tremendously impressed, I think, by the miracle that has taken place here in Israel. Even television itself cannot help but bring to these young people the remarkable achievements that are reported and which they learn about academically, intellectually, that are taking place here. Moreover, the side effects of the UJA has had a tremendous influence in the rising generation. I don't mean just that they are asked to contribute money, but the educational byproduct of the UJA movement, year after year, bringing to the fore in Jewish life in America the necessities and the requirements of Jews in Israel, is bound, in my view, to have had a broadening and an intensification of Jewishness on the part of these young people. A whole generation has grown up since World War II, and they have, as a result, found a quickening and a sensitivity to the problems of Jews all over the world, just by their contributions as in their local communities to the Jewish Welfare Federation, to the Allied Jewish campaigns and the UJA campaigns, has meant more than the contribution of their monies, their dollars. They have learned something of Israel, maybe not enough, but many of them have learned enough so that they have wanted to come here. I can't help but think that the great influx of American tourists to Israel is very much bound up with the involvement of Jews in America, not with the Zionist movement, but with the philanthropic apparatus that has been set up through UJA.
You just mentioned the word philanthropic, and I waited for this word because a few didn't want to use it and tried to turn around it. Do you think that Israel can or could or should take a greater place in your educational system?
That what?
That Israel
Yes.
should take a greater place in your educational system?
I think that it has already and will no doubt increase as the years go on. When I look back at the curriculum that was offered in Reformed Jewish religious schools 15, 20 years ago, and particularly when I reported my findings of the survey I made of Reformed Jewish religious education at the 25th anniversary, after 25 years that when Emmanuel Gamron of blessed memory, made his first study, my study followed his, I found a tremendous change in the emphasis of the curriculum. In the earlier years of the Reformed Jewish movement, the curriculum emphasized the Bible, Jewish history, which ended with the destruction of the Second Temple, and general Jewish ethics. And that was about it. Nothing in the medieval period, and certainly nothing in the modern period that would emphasize the forces out of which came the various problems and the struggles in the destiny of the modern Jewish people. The emphasis today in Reformed Jewish curriculum, I think, is strongly motivated by the forces which have taken place within our own lifetime. The emphasis is heavy on contemporary Jewish life, particularly Israel. What is happening in Israel, the history, the problems of the people, the language, the cultural patterns, the institutions, what I call the great miracle that has taken place within our own lifetime here in Israel.
I think we'll have to stop now.